All right, let us begin this next session of our tribute to Leo. This section called Building Capacities, Education for Democracy. I'm the chair of the section, Dennis Pilon. I'm an associate professor in the department at York. I'm also a former student of Leo's. I don't think it's by accident that the organizers put together a session on building capacities, education for democracy in this tribute to Leo, because I think that it's always been a considerable part of his work, this idea that socialism isn't just an idea, that social change isn't something we're going to work out amongst an elite and then impose, but in fact is something that will require the active organization and cooperation and education of the broad mass of working people. And so we have a fine group, a dream team, if you will, up here, ready to discuss these ideas through the lens of a Panachite analysis. But let me begin on a more personal level. As chair, I'll just take up a moment of your time, because as a former student, I think I have a little bit of insight into Leo as an educator. And I think we've heard from a few people how Leo shaped their views. I like to think that when I arrived at York at the age of 32, I was always pretty shaped, already pretty shaped by my working class background and all the kind of works that I had done prior to that. But having said that, I still thought I was, unformed but relatively impressive raw material. And Leo wasn't so much a shaper as a kind of, working class and socialist finishing school. His job was to, hammer out all the rough edges, and I think it's fair to say that, Leo did challenge some of the more strange and silly and ridiculous ideas that I had, but somehow managed to retain the essence of why I decided to come to York in the first place, which was to take class seriously, and to help me do that by becoming more rigorous in my analysis, and by becoming a better communicator of the things that I was trying to study and get out there in front of people. So, but having said that, one thing people haven't mentioned, and I think it is something worth remarking, is Leo's unease with the relationship with his students. Because Leo is, I think, a natural equalitarian. He's not actually that fond of this hierarchical relationship that necessarily exists between professors and students. And so I think there's always kind of a magnetic pull of Leo to pull us towards the equal relationship, sometimes whether we liked it or not, sometimes whether we enjoyed it or not. Nonetheless, I think it was very good for us. And I know for myself that when Leo invited me to contribute a chapter to the Socialist Register, I felt deeply honored. I felt that I had really arrived in terms of being a colleague, a comrade with Leo, rather than just a former student or a student. And that's the kind of guy he is, right? He wants to bring you into the circle of comrades to participate as an equal member in the things that are going on. That can be challenging to do at a university, but I think Leo does it very well. All right, let's turn to our impressive panel. I want to say a few words about them, and then we will get started. So introducing them, starting with Stephanie Ross. Stephanie Ross, who finished the program just slightly ahead of me, or started it for me. She has the distinction of being hired not once, not twice, but 3 times by a university. I mean, a lot of grad students are just desperate to get one job. And Stephanie has managed to get 3 with a long list of impressive accomplishments. She is one of the founders of CALS, the Canadian Association for Work and Labour Studies. She is a co-editor with Larry Savage of a very impressive book series on labor. So a very long list of accomplishments, and also a former student of Leo. All right, let's get down to work. Our contributors have 15 minutes, and I will be using my bourgeois Apple iWatch to track your progress through that time. But I have also prepared a very impressive visual item here that I will use to let you know where you are at. So 5 minutes, 1 minute, and then of course when I open this, you will be at 0 minutes. Okay. We're just going to go through the list in order, so let us begin with Stephanie Ross.
Thank you for that embarrassing introduction. And yeah, we'll see about 0 minutes and what that looks like.
Use 5 seconds already.
Whatever insights I have on the question of how we educate for democracy are grounded in my own experiences as a student of working class origins, trying to navigate the bourgeois university. My encounter with Leo at a certain moment in that journey was and remains central to my own conviction that whatever educational work we do must contribute to building the personal and collective confidence of those who are marginalized in capitalist societies, to be able to speak the truth about the depredations of capitalism, and to build our own powerful organizations to realize the as yet unrealized promise of a truly democratic society. Part of what I learned from Leo, though, was that this work is also intensely and inevitably personal. So I hope that what I have to say doesn't come off as too self-indulgent. Unlike many people in this room, I didn't come to York to study with Leo. I did my BA, my MA at Carleton, and I had been studying Latin American politics and development studies. I was already a Marxist, largely because of Linda Freeman, with whom I took a political philosophy class at 19, and who had us read Marx and C. McPherson, and later a year-long seminar in development studies. So, Linda introduced me to the world of Marxism, but those insights hadn't really penetrated my own personal awareness, my own analysis of my own situation. My MA supervisor, Laura MacDonald, had been mentored by all of the excellent Latin Americanists here at York, and insofar as I had any plan at all, it seemed to make sense to continue in her footsteps. Of course, having been a student at Carleton, one did know something about Leo. There was an aura about his name, and another friend who was coming to York to study with him spoke about him in reverential tones. But in truth, I really wasn't in the know. I had read Elite's Classes in Power in a grad seminar there on state, and that was really about it. But I'd been experiencing a growing dissatisfaction with my direction. My own involvement in union politics at Carleton and then at York was creating a growing divide between my academic life and my political practice, and it felt like something had to give. So on a whim, in my second semester here at York in 1995, I decided to take working class politics and capitalist democracies with Leo. After all, I was at York, and everyone said, what was the point of being at York if you didn't do at least one course with Leo? But this was intimidating, to be sure. Leo, after all, was always larger than life, operatic in style, trenchant in his critical attitude, which was always on display at the weekly departmental seminar, and then also so erudite in his writing and knowledge of especially literary references. And I don't know many academics who can write about socialist politics, but also about Alice in Wonderland and Death of a Salesman, and this is something I have always very much admired about him. It's no understatement that the decision to take this course changed the direction of my life. In the first class, early on a cold Monday in January, Leo started the class in a way that I had never experienced before. He asked us to introduce ourselves by talking about our class backgrounds. I almost didn't know what to say, and in fact, I don't recall what I did say. No one, and definitely not a professor, had wondered about my class origins, had even insisted that it was important, as Leo went on to do. My gut, and I now know the hidden curriculum, had always told me to keep quiet about that. I never spoke about the fact that I came from a working class family in the Maritimes, from unionized parents with great fortune, a pipe fitter and a nurse, one of whom had experienced fairly severe poverty as a child, from grandmothers who had been thwarted in their ambitions, from a grandfather, a mechanic and a failed businessman himself, who was troubled to say the least. I knew not to talk about that. I had long adopted what I thought of was an Ontario voice to cover my Acadian accented English, because I thought I had to pass for someone who belonged here. It wasn't always effective, because I was always a little too loud and swore a little too much, but when one realized upon being in Leo's class that that actually wasn't a problem, and in fact, if you wanted to do well in Leo's presence, you kind of had to be loud. Although I hadn't understood it at the time, I had long been suffering from the hidden injuries of class, simultaneously proud and ashamed of my past and my present as someone who was leaving a working class milieu. I was that person that C. Wright Mills was describing in The Sociological Imagination when he wrote, seldom aware of the intricate connection between the patterns of their own lives and the course of world history, ordinary people do not usually know what this connection means for the kinds of people they are becoming and for the kinds of history making in which they might take part. In that first class, Leo talked about his own class origins without hesitation, without shame, and with a clear sense that his own family story was part of a larger narrative of working class organization and struggle, a unique development in the history of subordinate peoples that pushed against the limits placed on economic and political democracy. Something hard and scarred broke open in me. Some new insight dawned on me. Maybe my family story, my community story, wasn't just valid. Maybe it was actually important. But this was not a romantic history that Leo was inviting us to explore. This was a clear-eyed stock-taking of the historical legacies, and I'm quoting now from the course outline, which I still happen to have here, 22 years later, all yellowed and dog-eared. He invited us to take a stock of the historical legacies, contemporary dilemmas, and future possibilities of working class parties and trade unions, in which we would ask questions that since then have driven my own research and political commitments. Quote, what are the examples of and possibilities for a renewal of socialist politics in the wake of the failures of working class politics? Can this be done without a revival of working class politics in new forms that go beyond the limits of communism and social democracy, as well as conventional trade unionism? This reading list, and if you want to look at it, you can, is a beautiful thing, full of pieces that had an indelible effect on me, included so many people who are actually sitting in this room, Brian Palmer, Hilary Wainwright, and of course Sam Ginden, and are amongst the people that still form what I consider to be the intellectual guideposts of my own work. But answering these questions that Leo posed takes the building of both individual and collective capacities. At the level of individuals, I've discovered this is emotional labor as much as it is intellectual. It means a commitment to nurturing the intellectual and political confidence of diverse working class people so they can take their rightful place in the production of knowledge and strategic thinking needed to engage in democracy building, in history making. This Leo modeled for me, for us, not just in his evident support for an engagement with working class activists in struggle, often in opposition in their own organizations, cultivating and nurturing and supporting their personal development. For me personally, when he agreed to be my doctoral supervisor, he blessed me, I would say, with the gift of high expectations, something that working class people, working class students usually aren't blessed with. In fact, they are quite repressed and oppressed by low expectations. He pushed me to pursue an ambitious topic rather than the fairly limited one I had initially proposed. He expressed a boundless and enthusiastic faith in my capacity to pull it off, and was incredulous when I expressed doubt. That confidence was at times dizzying, pointing to seemingly unattainable heights. But it is this very confidence in their abilities that many working class people lack. When seen at all, working class people are objects, human resources, only useful from the neck down, or failures in a Darwinian survival of the fittest. It is this internalized contempt of bourgeois society that we must help shatter, and Leo's educational work always actively aided in that. At the level of organizations, Leo has always insisted that we must be building collective capacities to be ambitious, to think, to plan, to deliberate, to criticize, and to decide. This meant centering attention on the working class and its organizations, even when they were full of contradictions or passed out of intellectual fashion. As Leo and his co-editors put it in the 2001 preface to the Socialist Register, the absolute numbers of proletarians, and indeed workers and trade unions, have never been greater, as a set of social relations then class is as central to understanding the dynamics of contemporary capitalism as it has ever been. But class is a political relation in the sense of workers consciously forming the class insofar as they engage in a common battle against another class, that is, as an agency advancing political and economic alternatives to neoliberalism and capitalism, remains deep in crisis. And this crisis, as we've been hearing today about its various contours, matters centrally to the democratic project. Because whatever else we need, democracy will always be truncated without the broad involvement of working people. And unions, for all of their warts and problems, are important in this process of democratization, because as autonomous class organizations and whatever else they are, they provide workers with the context for developing consciousness of their interests in capitalist society, the desire to supersede it, and the capacities to participate fully in the management of a future society, at least when they're at their best. Since hierarchical capitalist social structures prevent workers from gaining those required capacities, consciousness, and organization for full and equal participation, they must be acquired elsewhere. Otherwise, people will simply replicate the elitist social relations to which they are accustomed. So in working class organizations, and why we continue to care about them, why we continue to work to make them better, they are places where workers develop the social instincts, and here I'm quoting Marx, in place of egotistical ones, which are the result of centuries of bourgeois rule. It is where they throw off all habits of deference, acquire confidence in their ability to organize and rule, and develop experience in the organization and making of political decisions. And as Leo's close collaborator, Sam Gindin, put it, workers must develop in their organizations the kinds of capacities and potentials which are absolutely fundamental to one day building a different kind of society. While he insisted on the importance of such organizations as spaces for democratization, Leo nevertheless did not fail to subject socialist and working class organizations to ruthless criticism. And I think that we've already talked to a great extent about his contribution to those critiques. But I think what's important about Leo is that criticism was never just a posture. It was never just about saying that everything was shit. It was never about criticizing from on high. Instead, it was practical. As he wrote in the preface to the '97 Register, such critique was essential so the ground may be cleared to rebuild socialist projects tomorrow. This educational project, Education for Democracy, also means a different kind of political science and a different kind of academic. It would have been easy, I think it would be easy, and maybe it is always still a struggle, as a working class person, now a tenured academic, as Dennis pointed out. It would be easy to accommodate oneself to the rewards of mainstream academia, the pleasures of bourgeois life and respectability, in much the way that Robert Michels characterized the trade union leadership. For what interest for them has now the social revolution, their own social revolution has already been effected. But Leo created a place in academia where people like me were drawn to study with him. And together we were able to create a kind of unique, intellectual, and very politicized community where we felt that what we were doing, what we were talking about, was important not just because it was developing careers, but because we were going to contribute to that project of democratization in all of the spaces that we would eventually find ourselves. And on this front of creating a different kind of political science, Leo has always insisted that mainstream political science had to give way, had to make space for different actors. He criticized political science for always placing at its core the workings of the powerful, their techniques and concerns And indeed, I would say political science almost fetishizes that. And I think you can best see that in the way that people who go to conferences like the American Political Science Association are all very much a shiver with the idea that they are going to be part of state power. But Leo spent the better part of his career building this alternative political science, a more genuinely democratic political science, nurtured in this department and now hopefully carried forward by all of us who've had the privilege to be here. And I think it's worth quoting Leo's words at length on this, and this is how I'll finish, about what this project entails. And this is from the conclusion of that first essay that I ever read by him, Elites, Classes, and Power. And in it he says, "We can see in this sense the importance of a political science that is trying to know more than how to uncover how the power elites rule the world, but that also has an understanding that the majority subjected to that rule also have power capacities, and is trying to discover how those capacities might be enhanced, not just to criticize the elites or the ruling classes, not just to include their decisions through struggles from below, but to transcend the present system of power relations entirely. This is less a matter of constructing utopian visions of a good society than of discovering the means whereby the subordinate classes have increased their power historically and of trying to discover further and better means. Political science has a role to play in demonstrating that most people are not just passive recipients of someone else's power, that they currently exercise some power, even if just in relation to the greater power of the dominant classes. It could have a larger and more creative role to play by discovering the limits to the ways in which subordinate classes have organized so far, and by trying to think through and offer advice on how to organize for a fundamental change to the powers that be. This will, above all, be a matter of discovering the kind of political organizations that enhance the intellectual capacities of working people themselves, so that they can become leaders and educators in their own communities and develop their capacities to run society and state in a more fully democratic manner. To be a political scientist in this conception is to be someone who knows how to do more than criticize the power elite. It is to be someone who is orientated to discovering how to help those who have the potential power to change the system, to realize that potential, and then actually to act on that potential. It's this democratizing mission that I've taken from Leo that guides my own intellectual, political, and pedagogical decisions. It's what informs my orientation to the labor movement as a critical ally. It is what helped me understand that the life and struggles of my family and people like them mattered. And for that, Leo, I will be endlessly grateful.